Thanks very much, Bruce, and it's great to be here. Thanks to Matt McCarthy for getting me along again and for giving me the graveyard shift, and therefore thank you to those of you that have made it to the end. It's great to be here. So, straight out, yes, I think from those 20 years of experience that I've had in grain cropping in Western Australia, we can keep growing profitable crops into the long term, despite this big problem we have with herbicide-resistant weeds. But we're only going to do that if we declare war on the weeds and we throw more than just herbicides at them. So all of my experience and my observations from WA are telling me, yes, we can do it. I'm from WA. I'm a surfer and a kite surfer in WA. And obviously that means I'm prime shark bait, doesn't it, with the recent news. And I've been learning to kite surf the last couple of years, and what kite surfing involves. Anyone kite surf here? Any kite surfers? No, you might be a little bit landlocked for that, but if when you're kite surfing, when you lose your board, right, you've got to get back to it. What you've got to do is you've got to put an arm out like this and you control your kite with this hand and your body drag through the water back to your board. And basically you're just a human lure, if you like. If you're building a lure for a great white shark, that's what you would do. You'd cover someone in black rubber and drag them through the water. You feel like you should have treble hooks on your feet. Now, at that point, I know statistically that I am very low risk of being eaten by a shark, but I'm absolutely whooping myself about being eaten by a shark. And no more data or statistics are going to make me feel any less, right? And it's the same with decision making on farms. If you have farmers in financial stress, and they're not thinking long term when the sharks are circling, are they? They're not thinking about long term herbicide resistant weed management, they're thinking about this year. And they're also not thinking about stats. We can give them all the data in the world about how to manage herbicide resistant weeds based on the percent control you get with the different tools, but they're not listening because they're emotionally got to make that decision. They're thinking about something else. So what I'm going to do today is try and talk to you a little bit about that emotional decision making of getting into some of these non-herbicide weed management tools that we have. I know it's a bit of a broad, long bow I've drawn there, but you can see what I'm getting at. We can't just keep ramming data down the growers' throats. That's not our only means of communication. And you guys, as advisors to the farmers, will need to take up on that. All right, so I got a wake-up call recently, and there was the wake-up call. This is the Clondinin survey of a couple of hundred growers around Australia, and they asked them what they're doing for resistant weed management. And what's this one here? I don't know if you can read it, but it's rotating chemicals. So that was the wake-up call. So the main tool that everybody's using is rotating herbicides, isn't it? It is. And so I'm going to tell you that I think that that's just not going to be enough and it's not going to work. And so what I'd like to do is, firstly, before I can tell you what some of the tools are, I'd like to convince you and give you some information about why I think just rotating herbicides is not going to be enough. And here's the first reason. This is a picture of some ryegrass, the Andrew Storey. Many of you know Stoz from over here. He and his now wife, Sally Peltzer, got a phone call from a viticulturalist. They'd had ryegrass, they'd sprayed it with paraquat, and it had survived. So in here is where they spray paraquat or glyphosate, and down here is where they mow. And so these ones have been sprayed with paraquat and they're alive. Now, the alarming thing about this is that it turned out to be both paraquat and glyphosate resistant, the ryegrass, and it had got that way by rotating between the two. Now, they hadn't rotated herbicides to a particular recipe. They'd just done it on an ad hoc basis. So some years they'd use paraquat, other years they'd use glyphosate, just mixed it up a bit. And so what's happened? We've developed resistance to both. Now, what is it about a vineyard that would mean that we could develop an ugly set of resistance like this? Well, it's that it's only getting herbicide in here, isn't it? There's nothing else. There's no non-herbicide in the system. Had there been sheep coming in and grazing under the vines or people pulling out the survivors, they wouldn't have the problem. But there was no non-herbicide. As it turns out, there's 4 of these populations around the world. There's 2 from Naracoorte, from the pasture seed industry, and another one from a vineyard. So Chris Preston discovered the ones from Naracoorte. And similar story, these guys were using paraquat to do the winter clean, and then they weren't doing anything afterwards. The ryegrass was setting seed before they came in with the mower or slasher or whatever. Similar story from one that Steve Powers worked with Andy Cairns from South Africa on many years ago. Another one, glyphosate and paraquat resistance, both products being used. Now, there's a few possible explanations, but all of it boils down to the fact they use both herbicides and they develop resistance to both because there was no non-herbicide in the system. Here's another bit of alarming data on it. This is Roberto Buzzi. Roberto is one of our AHRI researchers, and he's our marathon runner. Roberto, he's the winner of the Perth Marathon the last 2 years in a row. He's an amazing runner, Italian guy. Grew up running in the foothills in Italy, and he's done a lot of this low dose work. So he exposed ryegrass to low doses of glyphosate, and he shifted the curve. So this is the susceptible, and this is the selected progeny here 4 times. So he shifted the resistance by doing 4 recurrent selections with low doses of glyphosate. He shifted it to be more glyphosate resistant. The really alarming thing from this work was he also shifted it to be more paraquat resistant. Before I get to that, does that make it blank? Yes. So so that's one possible explanation for this paraquat glyphosate cross resistance. Chris Preston tells me in the field it's probably more likely that you'll have one of 2 scenarios. Either you develop it sequentially, so you develop glyphosate resistance in this plant, and then you start spraying this population with paraquat, and then you develop paraquat resistance. Or you develop glyphosate resistance here, and you develop paraquat resistance over here, and the 2 cross-pollinate. So whatever the means, we know that these plants can develop resistance to 2 of our most important herbicides, and while we're rotating between the 2. Okay, so there's a big blow for herbicide rotation. All right, so what Roberto did is he did some more low dose work that you've probably seen. And what he did was he broke Sakura before it even got to market. So he got Sakura and exposed it to low doses and developed resistance to Sakura. A lot of you have seen that work, right? Well, I'm not sure if you picked up the other part of that work was that he not only did he develop resistance to Sakura, but there was cross resistance to Boxer Gold and Avidex as well. And so is herbicide rotation helping? Yes, no. It's not going to be the be-all and end-all, is it? And then the other bit of evidence that I've got was before I came here, I called up Greg Toomey and I was asking him some of the questions about the local area, and one of his comments was, oh, well, there's not a lot of ryegrass in my area because my guys grow a lot of hay. And that's another obvious thing, isn't it? They're using herbicides. They've got this mechanical thing coming in behind it, removing a lot of the seed. They've got less resistance and they've got less ryegrass. So on the other side of the coin, a farming system where you have herbicide and non-herbicide like hay is working spectacularly well. All right, so before I completely destroy the concept of herbicide rotation, it is still a good idea, right? We've got to keep that in mind. It is still worth rotating herbicides. And I was talking to Steve Powers about it the other day, and he made the analogy that, you know, if you're fighting an army, guys in red coats that are lined up in the middle of the field with a gun in their hand like this, they're much easier to fight than guerrilla warfare, where you've got guys hidden everywhere and they turn up one day and not the next and use a whole heap of different techniques. So we've got to use the guerrilla warfare analogy. We've got to confuse nature and continue to rotate herbicides. It's a good idea, but in isolation, it's not going to cut it. So I guess my point is we've had the herbicide era. It's been awesome. It has been fantastic, and I still love herbicides, right? I'm still a big advocate of herbicides, but we need to move from the herbicide era to what I would say to the diversity era. And so herbicides are still going to be a big part of that diversity era. But the agronomists in the room, I know you're all expert in herbicides, where you need to become expert in the diverse range of other non-herbicide tools as well. And you need to know them as well as you know your herbicides. Okay, so that's a bit about why I think herbicide rotation alone is going to fail us. So what are some of the non-herbicide tools that we can use? So I'll have a bit of a look at some of those now. So I want to start with harvest weed seed control. Now, I could get up here and I've done this sort of presentation a lot and shown you the different tools and the costs and the percentage removal and all that sort of thing. I think most of you have seen a lot of that. If you haven't, on the Weed Smart website, under point 2 of the 10-point plan, you'll see that there's really good information about all the different harvest weed seed control tools. So there's a big wealth of info there. But what I want to do is I want to tell you 4 new things about harvest weed seed control that you probably haven't heard. So number 1 is just a story. I had an epiphany the other day, and the epiphany is I think I completely missed the biggest benefit of the chaff cart. I've been talking about chaff carts for 15 years, and last week I think I worked out what the biggest benefit of it is. And it's feeding sheep, would you believe? So I spoke to a guy, he's a farmer, he's east of Perth, and he has owned a chaff cart for 12 years, and he leases a lot of land, and that leased land is over about 70 kilometres. And he said that he just remembers how badly he used to sleep at night knowing that he had fires going 70 k's away. He hated burning the heaps. He costed it at $4 a hectare to run the utes and the labour and so on to go and burn those heaps. And so it was costly, and he just couldn't sleep at night. And so he started leaving out some of the heaps. So some of the ones that weren't dropped in a nice row, he stopped burning them. And he'd graze the paddock, and he noticed that when he would seed through that old unburnt dump, that there wasn't actually that many ryegrass. And the following year, the crop on that dump there was the best bit of crop in the whole paddock. It was a big amount of crop over this whole dump. So he stopped burning dumps altogether. And he says the big benefit for him is for his sheep. He's over 100% lambing, and I don't know a lot about the dollars of livestock, but he tells me that lambing percentage is everything in making money out of livestock. So he's using the dumps to prime the sheep to get 100% lambing, and he's not burning them, and he just seeds on through them. And the ryegrass just rots in the mould in like a compost heap. So perhaps the best benefit of the chaff dump is to feed sheep, and you can do away with the cost and expense of burning. So for mixed farmers in this part of the world, it might be a really good option to look at. Now, I don't have data and scientific evidence about, you know, the percentage of seeds that rot in the heap and so on. I'm going purely on anecdotal evidence there, but it's a very convincing argument, and there's a number of growers doing it in WA. So chaff cart numbers have taken off in WA now. If you drive around the wheat belt, you see chaff dumps everywhere. We had a workshop in Lake Grace last year. 5 guys walked out of that workshop and bought one. So that just never happens in agriculture when you do a workshop for growers. They're on board. Chaff carts have taken off, and they're seen as a really good cost-effective tool, and I think grazing sheep is going to be a great thing. All right, here's another, just a story, but it's chaff diversion onto tramlines. And this here is the chaff deck developed by an engineer in Esperance in Western Australia. And he built about a dozen of these over 5 years. And last year he built 25 of them. He had a huge demand for the chaff deck. So what they're doing is it's just a conveyor belt that diverts the chaff onto the tram lines. So the weed-containing chaff just goes on the tram lines. You're running over it. It's just in an inhospitable part of the paddock, and 40 growers out of Esperance now have these things attached to their headers. Obviously, it's only for the fully matched tramline farmer, but it's a great option for them. Now, there's some negatives, I guess. The weeds are still in the paddock, so you're still exposing them to herbicide. And also for a weed with a long seed bank life like wild radish, if you create these 2 strips of high seed bank, that you might have them for a very long time. So it's not without its flaws, but the growers, once again, that are doing it are saying they're just seeing a lot less ryegrass in that row than you would think, because it's sort of rotting in this compost heap again. So once again, I don't have scientific data for you. I've got a story, but it's a story of these guys in Esperance. They've gone tramline farming a lot down there, and now they've got a really good tool to divert the chaff onto the tram lines. That's what it looks like, and here's a blatant advert for it. So the guy's name is James Buddle, who designed it, and he can build more. I think he was at the limit of how many he could build last year, but he you know, too much demand's a good problem to have, probably, I think. I'll give you a minute to write that down. So chaff diversion to Tramlines, just another harvest weed seed control tool. Very cheap. They cost between $10,000 and $15,000 fitted to the header. And then after that, there's no cost. There's no burning. All you've got to do is harvest low and divert the chaff onto the Tramlines. All right, what else is new in harvest weed seed control? The Harrington Seed Destructor. Okay, you've probably heard a bit about it the last couple of years. Well, there's some good news story about it now. There's been 3 commercially produced, I think, by De Bruin Engineering, and this is the latest one. This went on Peter Sadler's header at Wongan Hills in Western Australia, and if you've got a keen eye, you might have picked or you might have heard what the difference is. This is now hydraulically driven, and so the previous Harrington Seed Destructor that had a belt drive in the mill now is driven hydraulically, and that's been fantastic. And so the Harrington Seed Destructor had a terrible first year. They built 2 and they didn't go well. The mill fell apart, and De Bruin Engineering had an awful year. Enough said, they've moved on. GRDC have kept throwing money into the Harrington Seed Destructor project. De Bruin Engineering sorted out their problems and they went hydraulic, and they've had an excellent harvest. This one did 2,000 hectares, and there's another photo of it. You can see that it spreads the chaff evenly. And this one here is one of the ones that broke down in year 1, was fixed, and then went and did 650 hours this harvest. This is Paul Green's machine. So Harrington Seed Destructor is a tow-behind unit, has had a really good season. They still are that $200,000 investment. De Bruin Engineering are continuing with it. They are building 5 at a time, and they're embarking on that now, and they have some demand from around the country. But they tell me that they'd like to get their orders in by February to get those ones built in time for harvest. The other news about the Harrington Seed Destructor is the integrated Harrington Seed Destructor. So this is Ray Harrington, the inventor of it and the inventor of several other things. Now, I can't say too much about the integrated Harrington Seed Destructor, but I can tell you a little bit. Ray went and bought a Class 9 header, case header, and the engineers from the University of South Australia, Nick Berry and Chris Saunders, they mounted the new mills. So there's new mills that are a bit different to the old cage mill. 2 mills mounted under the back, hydraulically driven. You might have seen footage of the original one from January 2013. Well, Ray put this on his header and has completed harvest with it. He had an absolute bugger of a time with hydraulics, but the mills went perfectly, and then once he got the hydraulics sorted out, he had a really good run from then on and ended up doing 250 hours with the integrated Harrington Seed Destructor. So there's no guarantee that that'll get to market if or when. It's very likely that it will. God knows how long. GRDC know that they had a bad run with the tow behind Harrington Seed Destructor. They don't want the same thing again. They want to make sure that this one goes out as a really good product. So it should come one day. It should be mounted on the back of the harvester. And Ray is very positive that it's going to be a good machine. So that's enough about harvest weed seed control. Not a lot of data there. In fact, no data. Did I show any data yet? I'll have some data for you data heads in a minute. But there's good things happening with harvest weed seed control. We've got 5 tools. We've got windrow burning. We've got chaff carts, baling, Harrington Seed Destructor, and diverting onto Tramlines. There really is a tool there for every grower. They've all got their differences about where they fit, and like I said, there's a heap of information on the WeedSmart website for that. Okay, let's go to point 2, and I want to talk about competition. So Cadell, he's my man for competition. This is him going over the Col de Tourmalet, defining moment of his Tour de France win. And so competition, I think, crop competition with weeds is something where we've got a lot of room for improvement. And I wouldn't call this an epiphany, but I've got a bit of a different take on it that I'd like to share with you. So you see data, here's some data, first bit of data, there you go. Old data. This is from Dave Minke when he was with the Department of Ag a long time ago, Merredin. Beautiful, most beautiful data that you'll ever see. Look at that. That is the ryegrass heads per square metre for different seeding rates, goes to very extreme levels of 400 kilos by row spacing. So narrow row spacing, high seeding rate compared to what we're doing, really. Okay? So you'll see a lot of data like that about narrow row spacing plus high seeding rate gives you better crop competition with weeds, right? No arguments there. But the problem we have is the first thing to go to is normally seeding rate, isn't it? So everybody says, I want more competition, I'll just up my seeding rate. And we know that for every 10 kilos, it costs you about $4, and that you've got to store more grain, you've got to truck more grain, it slows down seeding. People worry about screenings, even though it's probably a furphy. There's all these reasons why people don't want to go high seeding rates. Okay, so I am starting to agree a little bit, because the yield response to seeding rate's pretty well flat. Once you get to your optimal plant density, adding more seed doesn't give you any more yield. So you're putting in this extra cost for no more yield. So what I'd like to put to you is I think that row spacing and potentially crop orientation is going to be the most cost-effective way to get competition into your crops. So here we go, let's have a look at that. So here's Glenn Reithmuller. Glenn Reithmuller is a legend of Australian agriculture. He is an agriculture engineer, Ag Department, Merredin. He has done this trial for 27 years running, and I can sum it up with 4 sentences, poor bugger. 27-year row spacing trial, plus and minus stubble retention. Okay, and so here is his 2005 data. In 2005, he had a seed catcher on the back of the plot harvester to capture ryegrass seed. And what he found was that so this is a compounding effect. It's not a 1-year effect, remember. By this stage, it's been going for about 18 years. So by going wide row spacing over 18 years compared to narrow row spacing, this is how much seed, sort of 850 seeds per square metre he's capturing in the wide rows, and then the narrow rows, you know, is down to 250 odd. Okay, so there's the first bit of data. Now how does that look? So here's this year, the 2013 harvest, and this is the ryegrass head density in crop now, not seed. And the ryegrass head density in the 180 mil, so what's that, 7-inch row spacing, that's how many ryegrass heads there is. The wide rows, we've got this many, okay? So, and you saw Dave Minke's data, we know that narrow rows compete with weeds better. So how much does it cost? It's free. In fact, it makes money, right? So that's the big thing. It's cost effective. So let's have a look at the cost. So if you haven't seen this, you've got to get your hands on it, right? This is a brilliant review, 89 wheat row spacing trials reviewed by Brendan Scott and others from Charles Sturt Uni. And they reviewed the row spacing. Have you guys seen this? This hasn't been presented these last couple of days, has it? So that is the row spacing monograph. And what that says, I can sum that up. Poor bugger again. Did all this work? Here's the answer. 1% per inch. That is their good old wheat yield response to row spacing. For every inch that you go wider than 7 inches in this book, you lose 1% of yield. 89 trials. Pretty darn strong database, right? So what does that do for economics? And by the way, Glenn Reithmuller, his 27 years of data, 1% per inch. He was part of this book too as well. So let's have a look. So compared to 12-inch row spacing, we've got 10-inch or 7.5. So there's 5 centimetres difference or 11. The yield benefit that we can expect at that 1% per inch is 40 kilos extra yield if we go from 12 to 10. Or if we go from 12-inch row spacing to 7.5, we can get 88 kilos extra yield based on 89 trials, which puts an extra, that's how much money benefit there is per hectare. How much does it cost? So I rang the machinery dealers. A John Deere bar to go to 10-inch costs about an extra 13,000. The 7-inch costs an extra 24. If you're buying a DBS, they're much, or, you know, some of the more expensive bars, there'll be a bigger difference. The cost per hectare per year now, I'm no economist, I've just done the back of the matchbox. I consulted some economists and they said, yes, you could do a net present value, but per hectare per year, it's, you know, if you say that it's going to last 8 years and we're averaging that across 2,000 hectares of wheat a year, then the per hectare per year cost of the bar is about $1, $1.50 for the real narrow row spacing. Extra fuel, now this I just did based on the number of tines, so it's worst case scenario. So the fuel use doesn't increase proportionally with the number of tines, but that's what I've done. So the worst case scenario is the fuel use. It's probably half that. So to go to 7-inch row spacing, we're looking at at an extra $3.50, and so it's probably really half that. And the delayed sowing cost, this bar you can tow at the same speed. This one here you slow down a little bit. I consulted some growers that were doing it, and so there is a slight delay of sowing cost. And so the total cost is between $2 and $10 to go to narrow row spacing. So that means if we go to the scoreboard, if we go to 7-inch row spacing, we're $13 a hectare better off. Now that's based on a 2-tonne crop, right? If you're on a 4-tonne yield, you can more than double that dollar benefit. So there's really good money to be made in narrow row spacing, and there's a huge reliable data set to back it up. Now the other part of it, this is a trial I was involved in this year. We had GRDC came to the party with some very short-term funding. A phone call on Tuesday, trial sow on Thursday, that sort of thing. Really good response to our Regional Cropping Solutions Network in WA about seeding rate and row spacing. This is a trial I did last year. And the thing that I found was this seeding efficiency thing. So what percentage of the seeds that you sow, what percentage of them come up? Now, if you're at wide row spacing, 30 centimetres, you're cramming more into a metre a row, aren't you? I think we heard our Canadian gentleman talking about this. So only 70% of them come up. Whereas when we're at narrow row spacing, we're getting 90 to 100% of them out of the ground. So another benefit of narrow row spacing, you get more efficient use of your seed. You get more plants per square metre for the same amount of seed. Now, how am I going? I'm running out, but... So this is a story of a guy that's doing it. So this is a guy in West Minginoo. He's a classic story of taking over the farm, selling all the sheep and cattle, going cropping, 5,200 hectares of crop, 1 seeder, 18 metre seeder, tows 2 chaff carts behind his class headers, and he went to 7-inch row spacing. There's his bar there, his John Deere air hoe drill, 7-inch row spacing. Amazing stubble clearance, these new bars, that's the point. Don't think of the old bars. These new ones can handle a lot more stubble. They've got big spacing between the ranks of tines. He's cut the stubble that short with his big class header. And the tine pattern on these things allows awesome stubble handling. So you can achieve narrower rows for the same stubble handling is what I'm saying. And he can tow it at 10 k's an hour where he used to tow it at 10.5. So he can get the job done, and is using a ribbon sowing. So this guy manages to see 5,200 hectares with 1 bar with just he and his workman, because they use this thing here, the workman's spraying, then he calls him up on the two-way, says, I'm empty, he chases the tractor, fills it in 12 minutes, and then goes back spraying, right? So 2 guys can do a huge amount of work. And so he watched his neighbours at 7-inch row spacing for a while, loved the pattern that he saw, and he wanted to get the weeds to stand up more so he could get more of them in his chaff cart. So he wants to compete with them and get the weeds to be held up by his crop so he can get more in the chaff cart. So it's a brilliant system, and it's a good example of a guy that's stacking up competition with harvest weed seed control. And I'll have to go through it a bit quickly. I won't show you the data, but Catherine Borger is at another Department of Ag and Food researcher in Merredin, Western Australia, and she's done the crop row orientation stuff. So I don't know if you've seen this, but if you sow east-west, in the middle of the day, you've got this shading effect down the middle of your rows here, because the sun is low in the sky in winter. And if you go north-south, there's sunlight. Now, as I said, I won't show the data, but she got a 50% reduction in ryegrass seed set by going east-west compared to north-south. So I'm trying to say this to put it to you differently, that crop competition, I think we can do it better. East-west, that's free. It doesn't cost anything to go east-west. It's free if you've got a paddock that will suit it. Obviously, not every paddock suits it. But if you can go east-west, you can halve your seed set, we can get more yield out of narrow rows, and we can get more efficient use of our seed by going narrow rows. So that's my take on crop competition, how we can do it without necessarily going to greater cost. And I just want to finish up with a little bit about wild radish. I called a few agronomists, one of them being Bruce and Trevor and Greg before I came over, and they were telling me that wild radish is becoming a bigger problem in this part of the world. You heard from Grant Thompson yesterday. What did he say? He said, small radish, spray it twice, paint it on. Just get the coverage, paint it on. Now, this is what I think you've got coming, right? So there's a lot of canola wheat going in here, isn't there? Canola wheat or canola wheat. This is what we've seen in the last 3 years. This is triazine-resistant wild radish. Now, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. If you grow TT canola, wheat, and you've got radish, this will happen. But there's a really important thing you need to know about TT radish, triazine-resistant radish. It's maternally inherited. So what does that mean? That means the gene doesn't flow in the pollen, right? So it means that it's contained in the seed. So if you see a patch like this, contain it. You can contain it. Other people would say, oh, we'll just use it till it breaks because my neighbours are going to break it anyway. And yes, you might inherit it by the neighbours blowing through the fence. But you can contain this one more than any other resistance because it's not going to flow in the pollen. So that's one thing I wanted to point out to you. And the other thing I wanted to point out to you about wild radish was this. Okay, so there's an important thing about this beer can. I haven't had a beer for 12 years because I'm diagnosed celiac. When I did drink beer, I hated VB. I thought it tasted like soap. Shouldn't say that in Victoria, should I? But why have I got a beer can up there? For wild radish, that's your harvest height, the beer can. Harvest height when you've got your chaff card on or your windrow or Harrington seed destructor, that's a harvest height. And the top of the beer can, you should be familiar with the size of that, that's the size of the radish you're now targeting with your sprays. These ones here, forget it. Resistant radish, you can't kill them. When they're that big, Tomo showed you yesterday, there's a heap of brews you can kill radish that big with, isn't there? It's in the book. There's dozens of them. Once they're that big, the number of brews narrow right down. So 2 sprays, small radish, painted on. And as the song says, if all worst goes to worst, kill the bastards with a moldboard plough. That's being facetious. I don't think the moldboard plough probably is the tool for a lot of your soil types here, but another non-herbicide tool that's taken off in a big way in WA on our sandy soils. They said we couldn't do it on our sands as well, so don't be afraid to give it a go if you think you've got a soil type that might suit it. We got 100% weed control and 100% yield response. It was worth doing. All right, a couple of plugs, RIM. A lot of this stuff I've talked about, you can put it to the test with RIM, Ryegrass Integrated Management. It's a free download on the AHRI website. If you want to set it up for a rotation for a client and you want to test some of these things I've talked about adding a chaff card or adding competition or changing a rotation, RIM is just a good decision support tool for you to have a go at. And the other one I wanted to plug is AHRI Insight. A lot of you would subscribe to this already. This is about a fortnightly publication that we put out, and it's just updating on the latest research in herbicide resistance. We're not trying to time it to the season or anything. We're trying to get the latest research to the agronomists. And I've got to say, in 3 weeks' time, there's going to be a huge announcement in AHRI Insight. So you want to subscribe now and get that news first. So I would like to leave it there. As I started, I believe we can, from what I've seen in Western Australia and my experience, we can keep cropping despite this herbicide resistance problem. Herbicide rotation is not going to cut it. You agros, you know your herbicides really well, you need to start to learn your non-herbicides as well. Thank you very much.